Please welcome Jeanne Morain.
Thank you. So the key with that story, what I am is a problem solver. So when people ask you, like, what do you do? I write books actually to solve problems. What I've really done is developed products and markets. So Kia Bonilla here, him and I and Jamie McQuarrie, Pat Spica, there's a few others, we did business service management together, created a $32 billion industry. And when I left BMC and I went to VMware, I worked the market vision for something called Universal Client, which is roughly about $1 billion worth of revenue for VMware today. And it's turned into between a $56 to $64 billion industry. Not because I'm that smart, but because I like to look at the world from a different perspective. So today, we're going to talk about embracing digital transformation, and we're going to talk about some of the realities of where we're at. So when people talk about mobile device management, and they talk about, how the world is changing, I want you to think about a few things within your own environment. How many of you would say you were cloud on purpose? Really? So you have a cohesive strategy for your company that you decided from day one, back in the 90s, when the cloud was first forming at companies like Marimba, that you were going to use the cloud to distribute technology, do mobility, analytics, big data? Or did we get there by happenstance? Now, I can tell you in 1996, when people talk about shadow IT, I worked for the business, my very first job out of college. I put Marimba together with a company called Selectica. I picked 2 IT products as a usability engineer to solve a business problem. Did I include IT? Not at all. So a lot of what we consider shadow IT, is it really IT, or is it the business actually just doing their job? So kind of like this Dilbert cartoon, looking at all the proliferations of different ways to communicate, it's only gotten worse, hasn't gotten easier. So maybe we need to change our perspective. Because all companies want to be the next Facebook, Uber, Netflix, Airbnb. Born in the cloud, they want to transform their industry, have a different business model. But what each of those companies have in common, so Facebook was one of my interviewees for my latest book, is that they took a different perspective or a different look of using technology to solve old problems. But the key, when people talk about transformation, and you look at when they say people, process, and technology, where that actually came from was not the technology field or industry, but a field called human performance technology. That's what I studied in college. So in the field of human performance technology, it was created back in the 1930s for World War II, so that we could basically speed up manufacturing of war machines, warheads, to be able to move faster to win the war. And there was 3 fundamental things that you needed to have. First, you needed to create the technology. So let's take the automobile, for example. The very first automobile was invented in 1672. How many of you knew that? It took another, literally, couple of hundred years until you had a generation of users that never knew the world without the automobile. So all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that came with driving a car versus a horse and carriage went away. And then it wasn't until Henry Ford took, if you think about the cotton gin, the Industrial Revolution was literally hundreds of years before then, but it wasn't until he took the assembly line process, applied it to the automobile, that we had mass production of cars. It became affordable. They were solving a problem. So when we talk about transformation, and the digital transformation we're going through today, we're not really going through digital transformation from a technology perspective, but more of a people process. When you say we have a generation of users that have never known the world without Google, the internet, their smartphones, so are we transforming because of technology? Because I would argue because I was part of it back in the 90s. The analog to digital conversion happened in the 90s. It's not happening today. How many of you use analog devices now? Few. The only analog really is talking. So the digital dilemma is two things. So I worked for Dr. Victoria Mulfis when I was in college. She's a neuroscientist. And we studied the impact of technology on human brain development. And so the interesting part, when people talk about digital transformation, they always tell you what you need to do. They don't necessarily always tell you why. So the difference between a digital native and a digital immigrant is that the fact that we have reprogrammed their brains. When they were learning to walk and talk, when they were learning basic communication skills, like my daughter here, they were basically leveraging technology. So at 3 years old, she can barely count, but she knows how to steal her father's phone and type in the password numbers and play her favorite YouTube movies, right? And the question is why? Because they store technology now as a form of communication. So to them, it's like talking. So when we say you should text less and you should talk more, to them, they're actually communicating, so they think we're crazy. So one of the things that's important for people to realize, like to Phil's story earlier, when my father asked me, are you losing your mind? I actually was. So around adolescence, we go through something called synaptic pruning. So we clean out our proverbial hard drive, and you actually shed the largest number of neural synapses in the brain at any time during your lifetime to make room for all the learning you're going to take place after that. So as a result, because of what happened in the early formative years, reinforced by the parents, we have created the millennial generation. And the good news is, about the human brain, is our ability to adapt and learn from our young. So this is an opportunity for everyone in this room, when they talk about omni-channel experience, when they talk about how do I deal with the millennial generation, I challenge each of you to think back to what you did in junior high, what you did when you had your first job, what you did when you were learning or growing up in this industry, and really mentor a lot of the millennials, because you're going to find it's not that much different. And why this is important, and we've got to get out of this business and IT mantra, is the business is leading IT into digital transformation. I do CIO conferences and workshops all the time, and I can tell you I've never had a CIO say that 100% of the time the business goes to them to ask for permission. 17 years of working on the business side, what the aha moment for me was when I joined the Apollo Group to lead a $200 million initiative in IT around digital transformation, was the business wasn't listening to me. And then I realized, aha, I never asked IT either in 17 years. I would tell them what the budget was. So how do you get to become a part of it? And this is important because CEOs, they expect their digital revenue to increase by 80% by 2020. So we're only talking a few short years by now. And then when you think about that, they're talking about what their digital transformation is at the center of their corporate strategy. And why this is important is 67% of CEOs have it at the center, but 84% say it's failing. It's not working. And it's not working because we're divided between the business and technology. It's neither an either or anymore. And the real leaders like the NFL, the Gavilan Group, Schwab, some of the companies that I interviewed, they see that. So I interviewed over 180 participants for my last 2 books, qualitative, in person. And in addition to that, I also did a survey, because I realize it's important to have the empirical data to back up the qualitative pieces. Now, I don't consider myself an analyst. I consider myself a problem solver. So I was really trying to figure out what is delaying or stalling digital transformation, and what are the phases or lessons so we can educate the industry to help them figure it out. But I didn't do it as a spectator. I did it as a participant with other participants. And why this is important, if you think about the business is leading digital transformation, because business and technology speak different languages today. So many times I see people saying, for the tech team is going to tell the business how to write a business case. Have you ever been able to do that? If I had a technologist try to do that to me, I would just shut the door. So the key is that because they speak a different language, you need to embrace the change and make sure that you're working with them. Make sure that they also have a seat at the table, or more importantly, you have a seat at the table in their planning. Because more often than not, is IT at the table? Is the budget given to you? Are you their part, writing the executive directives or business cases driving the company? But you should be. And so when looking at who has a seat at the table, the question is, how do you get there? And I would argue, invite them to your table. Educate them on the gaps of what's missing so they can have cost, compliance, and agility. Because at the end of the day, and this is the key, no matter if you're talking about Internet of Things, big data, mobility, having created the first mobile device management product back in 2003, I can tell you everything is centered around the cloud. So when you look at this, everything is a service workload in a cloud somewhere. On-prem, off-prem, wherever you want to call it. So that hasn't changed. So we talk about the overall market and they talk about the pillars of Platform 3. My question for you is the cloud should be the horizontal component that connects everything together. If you don't figure that piece out, the rest of it won't work. And this is important because the hybrid world is exploding. So we talk to customers, and customers talk to us, but we look at everything like it is a centralized service workload somewhere from an IT service. The vision around business service management was looking at it from the business perspective of what is a business initiative. So the business is driving the initiatives. We need to understand what that service means to them. And that's important because if you think about the explosive growth, so just in November alone with IDC, I've heard between 20 billion and 50 billion devices, depending on the analyst, but the increase in shadow IT apps. So when I did my research, it was 300 shadow IT apps just a couple years ago. Now it's over 1,500. Now you look at 65% of those workloads are predicted to be off-site. So you think of all these workloads that are lifting and shifting. The business is working around IT more than ever. It's not that they're working around IT. What are they doing? They think they're doing their jobs. Over a third of their employees are going to be working for another cloud provider or a different company. But the CEOs, CFOs, they still have a fiduciary responsibility for what? For spend. If you talk to the NFL, their number one concern is brand protection. Their number one concern from the IT leaders, not just the business. So let's go back to that 84% of global 500 companies, according to Pulse, are failing in their digital transformation efforts. And my question to you when we talk about software-defined data center, when we talk about merging and pulling all these people together, how do you transform or comply with what you can't see or track? So unless we can give them visibility across these service workloads in the cloud, how do we expect the CEO or CFO to build a valid business case? How do we expect to be accurate? So I'm going to challenge everyone in this room to help your company by one, the business and IT is one group. You don't work for different companies. So what do you need to do first? As you're coming together, you have to discover. You have to figure out what's there. And not just from a legacy platform too, but what is actually in the cloud. So looking at new discovery services like AWS Discovery, because you have to find out what you have to understand what it's going to cost, or what it is already costing. Then you have to map it, but not to the IT service, to the actual business initiative. So understanding across this hybrid environment, what is the impact to the business initiative and the business case before you migrate a service workload? Then you optimize. It's never a one and done. Too many of the cloud services, when people are either planning it, it's a project, and then it's over. But is it a project for the business? Or a service or product that lives in perpetuity until it becomes end of life? So it needs constant care and grooming. And then finally, they need the ability, when we talk about predictive analytics, within their usage of these workloads in the cloud, so they can predict and plan. That does not exist today. So all of us have a responsibility to help the business and IT, because we all work for the same company, to have one plan. So from my experience, your transformation journey starts first with understanding, creating that cloud command and control. So when I say creating cloud command and control, it's really looking around at your table and creating that ability to look across the hybrid world and the everything as a service application component today, inviting the business and IT together. This is the exact process that I implemented for the Apollo Group. And I've worked with multiple executives across large companies to implement, is understanding who has a seat at your table so you get invited to the big boys table. The other one is roadmap to cloud. So we're doing all these mobility, big data, IoT roadmaps, but if it intersects at the cloud, if your proverbial cloud is not in order, those other initiatives are not going to succeed. Something will be remiss. And the big piece with remiss goes into phase 3, which is really determining cost and compliance. Because what I've seen that all these initiatives, like IT, they're managed in silos. So what happens? People overstate benefits, understate cost, double count cost, and then next thing you know, what the CFO was expecting to get returned, did he get it? No. So cuts have to be made somewhere. That's why we never have enough budget to finish the projects. Because we have to quit looking at it like a project and start looking at it like a product or a service. One of the suggestions I would give for all the IT leaders in the room, do what Joe Natoli did at the Apollo Group. He hired me. He sought out someone who had product management experience working for technology companies to build out a team that understood how to write business cases, but understood technology. And who did I recruit? Product managers from Blackboard, Cisco, the same thing. So we built out the process and balanced it. So you had someone who could speak the language of business to close that cloud chasm. So after you understand the cloud cost and compliance, the next phase is really calibrate vision to reality. And just like anyone when they're talking about balancing a portfolio, I've had lots of discussions in this area, vision without execution is hallucination, right? And so you can have the greatest vision in the world, we have all been there, but if you can't execute on it, it doesn't matter. So really have those frank conversations together as a team. Technology, finance, financial planning and analysis, fixed asset accounting, the line of business leaders. It's okay to say no. Because if not, what's going to happen? They're going to take it somewhere else. But more importantly, not only is it okay to say no, it's okay to make them understand that some of your cost, when you're trying to charge them for a virtual machine on a private cloud, also contains costs for the routers, switches, hubs, for the data, storage, networking. So when they go to AWS or Azure or third-party cloud, are they looking at that? No, because they don't understand it. So it's kind of like, it goes back to the story with Phil and my father. I had one perception of how I thought it was supposed to be because I didn't really understand where he was coming from. So decided to take matters into my own hands and solve the problem. And the business is doing the same. So by educating them that, hey, guess what? Even if you go to SaaS or infrastructure as a service, it's a service workload in a cloud somewhere. The data has to get up there, so your ISP costs are going to go up. You still have to upgrade the gremlins in the data center. Just like you wouldn't put your 16-year-old in a Ford Pinto, don't run your infrastructure on old hardware. So after you calibrate vision to reality, the next one is looking at, then you build out your cloud service platform. So what are most companies doing today? So companies like the NFL, who had the most connected Super Bowl game last year of any in the history of the NFL. So Aaron Amendolia, one of my interviewees, amazing guy. At the end of the day, if you ask him what was most important, he will tell you, if the internet goes on, the Super Bowl will not be canceled. The game will still go on. So we need to think about, how do we enable the business? How do we provide additional opportunity and agility and work with them as their partner? Because at the end of the day, any cost savings goes back into IT, whether it's a franchise owner or the NFL itself. But more importantly, from a security perspective, and this is where the cloud service platform comes into play, is how do we protect our customers, our franchise owners? How do we protect ourselves from running with scissors? Because with viruses, it's not a matter of if you're going to get infected. In this day and age, it's when. In 2015 alone, there was nearly 1 million viruses written every day. So when you think about that startling fact, a lot of what we talked about from those digital natives whose brain hasn't fully developed, so they haven't thought about the full consequences of their actions, and as a result, they think it's fun until they take a company down. Or it's a challenge, like we talk about Internet of Things. How many of you heard of Morain? Morain is a botnet that basically can spin up IoT devices, because they're based on Raspberry Pis, up to 550,000 within minutes. So Morain took down Krebs on security. Morain also was responsible for internet slowdown and some outages in New York, Chicago, West Coast, Southwest, Southeast, last October. So when we talk about these different pieces and we talk about IoT, the important part with building this cloud service platform, and I have realistically the framework in my book, and it's not just a technology framework, but it's a process framework. The important part is understanding. It's about security, compliance, cost, and agility. You've heard that a lot today, but it's not just hearing it or talking about it, it's understanding, what does that actually mean? How do you sequester your IoT and your mobile devices from your internal apps? How many of you have heard of the target breach? HVAC system? So how do you make sure that you've built the moat versus the wall? That you've sequestered the environment, like many of the leaders who have gone all cloud in some cases, but they're still protected. So after you've figured out your framework for your cloud service platform, and the key around a cloud service platform, this is not something you're going to get from a vendor. The companies that are the real leaders build it themselves, and really what it is an internal framework, or what are the policies and governance of how we're going to use our infrastructure, whether it's on-prem or off-prem, as a company. Let's set the tone from the top down, help the CEO look at his vision and make it become a reality, so we're all not hallucinating. Because I'm going to ask all of you, how many of you can name the top 5 wagon wheel dealers today? So think about, when we're talking about this transformation, they say 40% of the Fortune 2000 companies will be out of business. So we owe it to ourselves. Every leader that I've highlighted in my book wasn't a cloud leader, cloud native. They were a brick and mortar company that transformed their business by leveraging a cloud service platform, by rethinking the way that they do business, re-architecting and organizing. So in many cases, when they built out their CSP, they took the developers and they put them under the line of business leaders. They created DevOps-esque processes, because sometimes DevOps is a dirty word from a CIO or C-level business perspective. But from an operations perspective, many leaders like Gary Ackermite actually expanded their area of expertise. He now runs supply chain and logistics. How many of you heard of farm to fork, food to table? So that was an innovative CIO that said, you know what? I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to give the business the developers. We're going to move them out closer to the farmers, understand how we can speed things up. I'm going to focus on how do I automate operations. So Mr. Business, he sat down with his business leaders. You know your business more than anyone, but I know logistics. So let's trade. I'll give you my developers. They still have to dotted line into IT to some perspective. They still have to answer to this cloud service command and control. You give me supply chain and logistics. And for margins and percentages, for their company, it was significant. Another example is Kim Stevens of Intel. She went from being the CIO after onboarding and embracing shadow IT, over 1,800 applications, to she now is the Chief Operating Officer for IoT because she saved the company $1 billion. But looking at it differently, instead of fighting it and being the CIO, so let's work together. So we have to quit this us versus them because it's never going to work. So once you get to that point, the final phase, you look for your low-hanging fruit and you execute. So start small. Don't try to swallow the whale whole. I can tell you the initiative that I oversaw was 48 applications, 25 programs, and roughly 100 and some odd microservices, 400 employees, 100 on the business, 300 on the development side. And what I realized really quickly is they were trying to do too much all at once. So as a good product manager, I know you take a step back and you figure out what makes sense now working with the business. And you'll find that a lot of this irrational exuberance is people are trying to run forward to solve these problems from a business perspective. If you actually sit down and work with them and educate them, you'll find the right projects or initiatives to make your cloud service platform work and really transform your company quickly by taking a step back, take a deep breath, and then move forward, like Aaron Amendolia at the NFL or Brian Sink at GE. GE has 600 applications now in their CSP that are managed by 3 guys. So they slowed down to move fast. So if you want more information, Carrie Scott has 20 copies of my books that she will be giving away, as HP is one of my sponsors, this afternoon in the meeting rooms. So you can stop by. I'll be at their table. And if there's any questions or comments, I'll be more than happy to take them. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. You talked about C-suite's expectation around digital revenue growth, audience growth. And I'm thinking that traditional IT organizations, they're not really usually very digital savvy. More so when it comes to digital sales, social media, trying to create revenue channels, for example, through sales, for sales, through Facebook and other areas. So what I've seen is that the answer to that is create a different position called Chief Digital Officer. And that seems to work pretty well and leave IT to worry about infrastructure, cloud, things that you talked about. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that point.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of titles like that. So the key is not what the title is, but the role or the position, to your point. So for example, a lot of the marketing group at the Apollo, we moved the development team under them because they understood omni-channel experience, to your point. They understood the customer. So that was part of reorganizing, taking your enterprise architects, taking your developers and moving them closer to the business so they have that collaboration. Because a lot of the gap that happens today, if you think about a business analyst either has worked in the business, but it was years ago, or they've worked in IT, and they're not close to what's going on in the business today. So one of my favorite exercises to do with customers is one that I did quickly when I was at the Apollo group because they used Scrum and different things, and they took all these sticky notes, had this nice Six Sigma, mapped out the process, but it was all done by VPs. So as a usability engineer by trade and training, what I did is went to the floor of the call center, said, give me your top 10 reps. I want to observe them, and I'm going to pull them in and have them fix the process. And I gave them hot pink sticky notes to correct the VPs who hadn't touched the keyboards in a decade. And guess what? It looked like someone threw up Pepto-Bismol all over the wall. So part of the issue with getting requirements and doing it quickly is knowing how to do it. And having that day in the life or that customer in focus versus company out. And that's why we need to get out of our own shell. So you're absolutely right. There's going to be a lot of new titles. So not just Chief Digital Officer. I've seen Director of Technology Integration. I've seen Chief Governance Officers in IT. But I've also seen Technology Integration Officers in legal. So it's kind of interesting how you have business people with technical titles, but you also have technical people with business titles. So the key takeaway is make sure that you're hiring the right person to do the right job. One of the things that I found in my background in human performance technology is it's really critical that, like we in IT, we shouldn't be expected to think that the business is going to expect us to tell them how to write a business case. They know how to write a business case. We need to give them the data. So it's not garbage in, garbage out. It's not obsolete. We need to focus on what we're best at and show them so that they can make the right decisions and move faster and be in compliance. So it will take restructuring in many cases to be successful. Unless your company already does some of this today. Very few, though, that I've talked to actually do.